everyone. I wanted to talk today about probably a couple of things that are kind of interesting. One is about Baal worship in America, and I believe a few things are connected to that. So, who is Baal? Baal is a fertility god. This is a opposing god to the Lord God that's referred to in the Bible, the Lord of the Israelites, our God. And Baal is related in the line of Nimrod. If you remember, Nimrod built the Tower of Babel, and he tried to proclaim himself to be a god, really a human god. And we see this quite a bit in older cultures. You had human gods, like Pharaoh was considered a human god. And they could only be the ones that talk to God, or the gods, depending on the culture. And we see this a lot in ancient cultures. It's strikingly common. And for one, this is an element of control. When it comes to Nimrod, I believe that it was probably trying to emulate other cultures, and that's why he failed. Because if we know anything about the Bible, we know that God was striving to show himself over everything and to not be like the pagans. And so that would have been considered pagan worship. And Nimrod was trying to do that. So Baal falls in his lineage. And it also is part of the Ishtar religion, which Ishtar had been Nimrod's wife. And so it all kind of falls right in that. But for the most part, Baal is known as a fertility god, widely worshipped. There's lots of information out there on Baal. And it's not really, I don't really want to focus, I don't want to give praise to the deity of Baal. I want to show the context of Baal and where this God falls in comparison to Yahweh. And one of the things that we need to look at is, how is this, affecting America? So some of the terms you might hear is toxic masculinity, or we never hear toxic feminism. We just hear about toxic masculinity, and feminism is glorified. And to some degrees, I understand where the hurt comes from. A lot of fingers get pointed at white people, and how controlling, from American slavery to female oppression. Yeah. But the thing is this has been going on for eons. The biblical reading is that women were of a lower class than a man, and it is the same throughout the known world. So it's not just a white thing. It's not just a man thing. It is just a cultural thing where we as human beings are growing and understanding. But the thing that you can't do is you can't take the ability for the genders to be different. They serve a point. Men are different than women, and each gender has its pros and cons. And so just like anything, just such as racism, it was bad. And I'm not denying that. But the thing is that the pendulum is swinging the other way to where it's almost where now the oppressed are becoming the oppressors. And I've experienced this in my own life. I mean, these are things that I've seen firsthand where I have opened the door just being polite. I would have done the same thing for another man. Just open the door at a convenience store and been told that I don't need no man, or I don't need no white man, or I don't need a white person to open a door for me. Now, is everybody like that? No. But we do see where the few are controlling the narrative. The minor, and I'll say this about transgender. A friend of mine, and we were discussing probably, and this is just two people talking, probably about 5% of Americans identify as gay. And I'm talking about just straight up gay, not bi or anything like that, but that they are attracted to the other sex, roughly. It's not a direct quote. There's no scientific backing for that. That's just when we were discussing this and this came up, and this person deals with this in their own family. And then we have a subset of that 5% that is transgender. So we're thinking, and I could be totally wrong, maybe 1%. So what happens here is right now, the smallest are making the biggest cry. And it's problematic because it's turned the greater percentage into the bad guy. And it's also really, there are lots of people that don't care either way. Whatever you do in your own house is what you do in your own house. It's whenever you start pushing it down their throat. And I get that. I do get the counter argument to that. Well, you're a Christian, you push it down people's throats. Well, we offer churches. And we do have evangelism. But none of this evangelism, none of this should be done in a toxic way. That's like saying you can't teach about anything to anybody. It's when you start pushing it down other people's throats. And I've said this often. I don't really particularly care for street preachers. I get the feel, the need to do that, but I also get that is not necessarily a positive route going about it if you go at it the wrong way. And I referred to this a long time ago as whenever I was going to a metal festival, and we had a street preacher at just outside the entrance preaching about metal being evil and everybody listening going to hell. And I remember how I felt about it, and I don't prescribe to that philosophy of people who find demons under every bed and in every book. I believe there's something to be learned. And I think that in a way I'm living proof of that because I've read lots of books that are not of God. I have read the Book of the Dead by that are for the Egyptians. I've read plenty of books about Hinduism, any kind of occult. I have read that. I guess I have a weird fascination of understanding why people believe what they believe. And none of that is of God. None of that is a Bible. But I learned. And I do believe that learning helps you speak on that person's level and understand them better. It's not coexistence. It's understanding. I'm not a fan of the coexist movement. You can't put Hindus and Christians and Islam and all the different varieties of Christianity all in one room and say that you're worshiping the same God whenever we worship distinctively different gods. I mean, that's just how it is. You should allow people to be different. You should allow people to express themselves and find their own paths. In fact, we don't do enough of that. everything's controlled. And speaking with the Baal faith, we've erected Baal monuments. One primarily of the bull, which is representative of Baal in New York. I firmly believe to this day that the reason why abortion came back up on the docket and people started having problems with it was because of New York and California and their practices towards abortion, how loosey-goosey they were with it. It's akin to the one bad apple spoils the bunch. I don't believe in late-term abortions. I don't believe in abortions for the hell of it. I believe in things that are medically sound, not just because you made a mistake. There's adoption for that. But it's not the child's fault because you didn't want to take appropriate precautions. And that's just the plain crux of it, is that people have gotten to the point where they are getting into the abortion for the hell of it. I made a mistake and I don't want to deal with the consequence. And so, and I've said this many times, if you take the consequences out of things, people don't learn anything. We do not learn if there is not a consequence. It's just how we are as people. You run your credit card up and somebody pays it off for you, you're just going to keep running that credit card up until you have to pay it off yourself and realize what a pain it is. The same thing goes for life. We've taken it for granted. And then I do not support transgender stuff. I feel like there's something wrong there. There are only two genders. If you feel like you want to be a different gender, that is one thing. But don't say that there are more than one gender. It's just not true. It is not factual. Now, could you have a condition mentally that is doing this for you? Yeah, absolutely. There are situations where people feel like they need to amputate their arm because it's not theirs. I do believe there are things mentally that go along with this, and I'm not saying that transgender people are crazy. I'm just saying that there are conditions that could support this. Does it mean that you grew an arm you're not supposed to, if we put it in that light? No. And I mean, transgender, come on, you're thinking you grew a penis that you shouldn't have to in some situations. And the idea that we feel that should be an even playing field in sports is ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous to think that women should compete against biological males. Hormone blockers or not, men are just built stronger in most cases. Not all cases, but most. So we have to be really careful. But there again, the one thing about Baal that is intriguing to me is I believe that this is becoming more of an influence of the Baal religion, because it has so much to do with fertility and going opposed to God. I would say that Baal is just a manifestation of Satan. And if we read in 1 Samuel, if you go to 1 Samuel, the ark, this is in 5. It says the Ark of Asherod and Ekron is the title. After the Philistines had captured the Ark of God, they took it to Ebenezer, to Asherod. Then they carried the Ark into the dragon's temple and set it beside a dungeon, or a Dagon, or set it beside Dagon, I'm sorry. Dagon's temple and set it by Dagon. When the people arose early the next day, there was Dagon fallen and his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. They took Dagon and put him back in his place. But the following morning, when they arose, there was Dagon fallen on his face the ground before the ark of the Lord. His head and hands had been broken off and were lying at the threshold. Only his body remained. So this sounds like a competition between statues. But the Ark of the Covenant was what the Israelites carried. And this was what they built. Basically, it's called the mercy seat, but it's what the Israelites used to show that God was with them. And it had some odd properties. You couldn't touch it or you would die. So they carried it with long poles. And if you are familiar with the walls of Jericho, which, it's named after a professional wrestler's move, it's pretty pop culture. But the walls of Jericho, the Israelites marched the Ark of the Covenant around the walls 7 times to bring them down so that they could take the city of Jericho. So this is the embodiment of the physical embodiment of God on this earth. And they put the ark in the same temple as Dagon, which relates to Baal. So there's a few different names. And so that's why it gets really confusing reading the Bible, what they're referring to. But in most references, they're referring to Baal. In some way, shape, or form, it relates to Baal worship. And then, we have what happened in New York, which is the rise in abortion, which, that's really, we would say Baal is a fertility god, but there was child sacrifice involved in this as well. And if you really look at that, doesn't it sound kind of counterintuitive that you're a fertility god, but yet you accept child sacrifice? His mother, Ashra, that's where the temple came from. That's all interconnected in a royal god family, human lineage. So, yeah. So here we are with, this rise in abortion and the craziness of gender dysmorphia. It's all rising. They erected, I want to say it was 2013, but I'm not sure. It's in the early 2010s that they erected a Baal, statue in New York. And there's other statues throughout the place, other states, but New York primarily, just because I always think of New York because it was hit so hard by COVID. And I think of California because it was hit so hard by COVID. It was hit very, very, and it's been hit with fires. Most recently, the Palisade fires. Now, is this God inspired? I don't know. But I do find it's interesting in the Bible when Jesus refers to there will be calamities in various places. I do find it interesting that California was in a drought when this happened, and God is the bringer of rain. I do find it odd that disease is one of God's, I guess you could say, punishments, as we see within the Exodus. And also, these are mentioned as happening in Revelations as well in the end times. So, could it be? It's plausible. It's interesting it happens in these certain places. Now, you could turn around and say, oh, what about Asheville? Asheville was hit hard. I will tell you one thing that's kind of interesting is those people's faith is great. And they didn't get any coverage. It was a blip on the news compared to what these fires are. There's been more coverage of the fires than there was what happened in Asheville. And Asheville's still recovering months and months and months afterwards. It's still third world conditions in Asheville, North Carolina. So go figure on that. Poor Christian people, and then you have Hollywood, rich, questionable people. Now, granted, that's where all the celebrities are. The celebrities are the biggest supporters of the Democratic Party. And some of the Democratic things, it's hard. They're very big proponents of abortion in all phases. You have to go out to the site to read that. But Democrats do not care in their doctrine. Not all people identify that way. And I'm not saying Democratic people are bad. I'm just saying in the Democratic, where they fall, is they don't put a limit on term for abortion. It's in all terms. So it can be a late term abortion, it can be an early term abortion. They don't put a limit at what point is that considered murder. I find that interesting. But I do see that there are things that the Democratic Party has that are positive. It's just that these foundational things are what most Republicans have. Most people, Republican and Democrat, are mostly moderate. They're not on the far reaches. If we could all put our heads together and come together with good stuff, that'd be great. But also when it comes to this abortion, it comes to man hate as well, because women carry the child and they want their rights, my body, my rights. Then this is man hate. And I will tell you something that's very interesting. And this is not biblical or whatnot. This is just something that's interesting. In the United States, the fertility rate has went down. There are studies showing that men produce less testosterone than they once did in the 70s and 80s. The United States birth, this is the fertility rate for 2027, or 2027, I'm so sorry, 2024, is 1.7. So just under 2 children. And this is not by a mandate. This isn't like in China, where China had the 1.5 child policy, and that caused where they're having problems right now. They don't have enough men. So China is having a problem with their birth rates to where, you could witness the extinction of children in China if it keeps going down. They've since done away with their limit on children, because you got to have a boy so that you can have other children. You can't have all girls. It just doesn't work that way. In the United States, it's under 2. So, that's changed. And the other thing about the United States is it's a giant melting pot. We have multiple cultures in the United States that are Americans, that have different roots. Think about that. You go from, say, someplace like Mexico or just another country where the birth rate might be a little higher. And a lot of them are. The civilized countries are a lot less. It seems like another factor here is the more civilized a country becomes and the less religious it comes in some places, the birth rate per woman drops. It's just, we prioritize stuff. We prioritize jobs. We prioritize houses, cars. It's pretty insane what we do. But just to give you an idea, Niger, Niger has the highest birth rate in the world right now at 6.6 births per woman. Central African Republic, 5.7. And those are, that would be the next in line. Chad is or the Congo is 6.0. Chad is 6.0. Somalia is 6.0. And then you have the Central Republic, African Republic, it's at 5.7. And you can see it just kind of goes on down and down and down. So what's happening there? I mean, I don't think Niger is, it's a third world country. It's not super civilized as far as industry and businesses and jobs. So, we have to watch that. I would venture to say that the more unreligious we become, the lower our birth rates go. Because we forget about God's one command, and that's to go forth and populate the world. We're supposed to procreate. And we're not supposed to stop having children. And whenever you start putting funds, you start putting stuff ahead of God. This is obviously what happens. I live in America. My wife and I weren't able to have children. So, I mean, I don't have any room to talk. It's not like we were going, it's just something that I see. And like I said, it's just another form of sacrificing our children. It's just not having them at all. We have to pay attention to these things because these were God's primitive commands for us. And I see it heavily influenced by religions and Baal worship. And we see it in the Bible. And I guess you could say we see ghosts of Baal in our current. The Israelites even reverted back to Baal worship whenever in the Exodus, and they had God with them in a pillar of fire or a pillar of smoke to guide them to the promised land. They had a representative that had the 10 commandments. These are the 10 primary rules for living. Is the 10 commandments. Above all, I would say that the 10 commandments shine brighter than all the other Levitical rules that became Jewish law. And even, I would say, some of the Jewish law conflicts with that, like, stoning somebody if they committed adultery. It's not part of the 10 commandments, and we can see that Jesus didn't have a good feeling about that. He said, he who is without sin, throw the first stone. So Jesus, in a way, brought us back to the 10 commandments. His birth, his death, his resurrection, the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, the Father, all is trying to get us back to the 10 commandments. So be careful in your life. Pay attention. The thing is, this is the toxicity that we add to society, whether it's toxic masculinity, where we have feminism, transgender agendas going through. If you notice all of this, the target is our children. Baal at the very core of the Baal worship is targeting our children, whether it be gender dysphoria, gender confusion, whatever you want to call it, whether it be abortion, whether it be imprinting toxic traits on a child. They said, it's such a bad thing to say that boys will be boys. Why? Their brains work differently. I teach kids, and boys work differently than girls. Girls are not inherently physical. They're not. Girls are generally more emotional and more inward. They're more towards their emotions, their feelings, and being in touch with all of that. Boys are not. Boys do not start out that way. That's why women mature faster than men, is because they get in touch with themselves first. Boys are very physical. They're very, they're not as emotional. They're very compartmentalized, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just saying, let them develop at their own pace, and we don't do that. We start trying to make decisions for our children instead of just letting it play out. We start telling our children that they're a boy or a girl, or they're undecided, before they even know what gender is. A child should be able to hit puberty and let themselves figure it out. They shouldn't be given puberty blockers. Sorry, there is health consequences to that. And a child below the age of 18 should not be able to, make a decision to have reassignment surgery. I'm sorry. You're catering to the 1%. And that's always going to cause problems. I mean, I hate to say it, but the majority is generally where it's at. I talked to a person today. I just simply went into a gas station this weekend. There was a man behind the counter, not dressed any particular way. They were wearing their uniform. And I could probably tell that it was probably a gay man. Generally there was just a certain way about him. I thought, well, it might be gay. The bottom line is all I did was say, thank you, sir. And they said, I prefer to be called ma'am. And I went, well, I'm sorry. But the thing is we're not psychic, for one. And I'm really sorry. We need to start realizing that basic truths, basic common sense, we're getting away from that. And in martial arts, we used to say, keep it simple, stupid. The KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. KISS. Why? Because when we start complicating things, we start creating a lot of problems that don't need to be there. And we already are. And I just feel like it's an attack. I feel like it's an extension of Baalism. And I feel like Baalism is an extension of Satanism. You've got to realize that God seeks for peace, wants you to have a peaceful life. Satan wants to disrupt things. He wants to create chaos. He wants to create division. He wants to create factions. So when you look at yourself, take a good look. What are you doing? In your life, are you creating a peaceful environment, or are you creating an environment of chaos? Remember, James told us, not James, Jesus. Jesus told us that it's not what goes in our mouth that defiles us. It is what comes out of our mouth that defiles us, because what comes out of our mouth is from the heart. So he's saying, if you love chaos, if you love to create problems, if you love to create disruptions, if you love to make people angry, then you've got a heart problem. And maybe you need to look at that. Is your heart in the right place? Do you have Jesus in your heart? Do you have the Holy Spirit in your heart? Because that's what it's about. We say God is love. Well, that's true. It's not false. But we have to be the instruments of love as well, which means watching our words. To this person, I said sorry because I didn't know. And it was done. It was easy. It was one word. One word stopped an entire conflict. So we have to realize that a lot of people, we're there to guide them. If they don't want our guidance, then they don't. Maybe we're not meant to. Remember, the Bible says that a seed gets watered, it gets nourishment from the soil, it gets sunshine. But the person, not always the same people are watering the seed. So don't try to do everything all in one go. It sometimes takes several people to help guide a person on whatever path that they're going to be on. And we're all sinners. So we may not have all the tools. Maybe if you've got a problem with sexual immorality and you've got a friend that is trying to get help with their sexual morality, maybe you're just not the right person to help them just yet. Maybe you've got to clean yourself up before you can help them. But maybe you're just to give some words of encouragement. Maybe you're just there to listen. God will influence you with the right approach if you look to him for what the right approach is. Anyway, thank you for the spiel. Today, I just see too much of this. I'm quite frankly sick of seeing so much of this kind of topic in our society. And I feel like it's very, very prejudiced in so many different ways for the people that feel that they're being, getting prejudiced toward, and then it affects how they lash out at people because now they've learned prejudice and now they are inflicting it to defend their way of life. People, we're all human. We're all flawed. We all fall short. And if we would put that in the front of our lens whenever we are working with other people, maybe we would get better results than just coming off like, I'm right, you're wrong, and that's that. Jesus, God, is the right way. But if you read the Bible, it is not so judgmental. Jesus ministers to people and says, go forth and sin no more. But he doesn't say, hey, you're damned for all the sin you're done. You suck. You're a terrible person. Yeah, I don't know that God really does that too much. The only time that Jesus really loses his stuff is when he sees the temple being used as basically a casino, a dime store, selling and benefiting off the word of God instead of enriching people spiritually. Anyway, I love y'all. I'm sorry I ran a little long. I do try to keep these to 30 minutes, but we're cruising up on just around 40. So I hope we all have a great week, and I love you all. I do genuinely mean that. I love you all.